An analogy that I like to use is that we're like Switzerland for security data, right? We want to play nice with everyone. We want to connect to everyone, and we want to be able to be used for any use case. So there are a lot of different use cases that we can power with the same set of connectors.
Welcome to Securing the Future podcast with your hosts Jesse Meadors and Ramin Lamei, where we discuss the latest cutting-edge technologies and how they are affecting the security industry. This is the show where industry expertise meets in-depth discussions.
All right, we're back for another episode of Securing the Future podcast. We are going to be diving into a really interesting topic today. First time we're actually going to do a vendor review of exciting new company that actually reached out to us and had a exciting, innovative solution. And I kind of label our title today a question. Am I dreaming, or are we actually looking at a potential of a unified API for security tooling integrations? I know for a lot of security leaders that I talk to, the ability to get their security tools to talk to each other and actually the ability for their developers to build dashboards or to build integrations is challenging. And so on today's show, we have Kabir Mathur, who is a co-founder of Leen, a unified security API company that is just building out really exciting stuff. So we're really excited to hear your story today, Kabir. And of course, as usual, is my trusty co-host, Ramin Lamei.
What's up, guys?
All right. So Kabir, first of all, love to get to know you a little bit, kind of hear the beginnings of your story. I mean, that's the exciting thing about any new company is the story, right? Like, how did things start? Why in the world did you decide to tackle this problem space? And from what I've understood, you don't have a security background, which I think is really fascinating. So love to hear a little bit of your story. Maybe just kind of tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your team, the co-founders there at your company, and how things came together. We'll kind of go into more details as we go here.
First off, Jesse, Ramin, thanks so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be on and talk a little bit about our journey. Hopefully it's valuable to your listeners. So I'm Kabir. I'm one of the three co-founders of Leen. My co-founders are Akash, who's the COO, and Neil, who's the CTO. I personally have been in startups for the last 15 years. So what I'm doing now, starting this company, it's what I've wanted to do for a very long time. And I'm very grateful every day to have the opportunity to solve a really interesting problem, work with a great team. And now we have customers to work with great customers. I've spent time in a variety of different industries, gaming, ad tech. I was most recently at a B2B SaaS company called Typeform, where I was leading product partnerships for them. And really what that means is building a bunch of tech alliances and integrations. So I ended up building about a couple hundred integrations with other best-in-class SaaS tools like Salesforce and HubSpot and Canva and Notion, Zendesk, you name it, right? So I had a lot of exposure over the last decade or so building integrations in a different domain. So for me, it's been about redirecting this experience to a new domain, which is cybersecurity, which is super interesting. Akash as well doesn't come from the security industry. He's also kind of a startup generalist like me. He's helped start India's largest startup accelerator called NASSCOM 10K. He's been a VC. He's been in private equity. He's worked at early stage startups. And of course, to round out the team, Neil is the one who brings the security experience to, which is, I think, very critical to solve the problem that we're solving. He spent the last 5.5, 6 years at a company called BlueVoyant, which is a fairly large MDR and threat intelligence provider, where he built out their whole automation and orchestration platform, which of course involves building out a lot of integrations, doing a ton of data normalization before that data becomes useful for automation workflows for BlueVoyant's, I think, close to 1,000 or so customers. So that was the kernel of the idea. It was born out of the frustrations that Neil felt in his previous role. And what's interesting about our team is we actually came together to solve a completely different problem outside of security.
Really?
We tried that for a couple of months. Didn't really see the traction that got us excited. And then this idea had been in the back of Neil's mind for a while. He was kind of hesitant to go back into security because he wasn't sure if it was a big enough problem worth solving. So we did the classic startup validation thing and talked to 100 or so CISOs, founders of other security companies, practitioners, and realized that the problem we're solving, which by the way is that of tool sprawl within security, right? Where now you have 4,000 or so vendors, many of which are multi-product. So you have 10,000 or so products in the market. So both for other vendors as well as for security teams, making sense of this data when every vendor has their own data format and perspective on different assets that a security team is trying to protect within a given enterprise environment is out of control. So that's what we set out with, and we try to figure out, okay, what is the solution we can bring to the market that actually helps address this problem rather than introducing yet another point solution. So yeah, that's a little bit about our origination story.
Yeah, that's very interesting. When I look at some of the challenges, I talk to CISOs on a regular basis, right, as a recruiter and as we run this advisory company. And the biggest challenge is, it's consolidation of all of these different subscriptions and services and tools. And how do you, gain the right information from each one? How is it customized for your specific needs and business risks? That definitely is a pain point for a lot of security leaders. And Ramin, being in the security field as a practitioner for many years, I'm sure you can remember being part of the blue team, probably feeling some of that pain.
Sure. I mean, back when I ran an operations team, we had well over 50 different tools. And, the challenge is, how do you operationalize 50 different tools successfully? And it's interesting as I think about, your use case. A lot of people we've spoken to more recently, especially in the last year or so, are more outsourcing security functions as well. Where, as I think of your use cases, even on the managed services or managed security services side, those are potential clients too, right? Or those might even be better clients for you guys potentially in the future because, imagine you're a managed service provider and, you have 10 different tools and you have 500 clients, right? You have quite the challenge of managing the different workloads there, and having these tools, integrated and having more of a single pane of glass for their operators to use, is beneficial in that space. Or, if you have your own operations team internally and you're managing your own tools, you're going to find value there too. So, your use case hits on both sides, whether they outsource or not, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So just to take a slight step back and explain exactly what Leen does, we build and maintain connectors with a whole bunch of different security tools in the industry, and we normalize that data into common data schemas by subcategory of tools within security. So for example, we have an EDR model, we have a vulnerability management model, we have a cloud security model, email security, CSPM, so on and so forth, right? Many such models, because it's not possible, I think, in security to have one grand model that rules them all. And we offer that over our API to our customers. And Ramin, to your point, we see three very distinct segments in the security industry that we can serve. We're a young company. We're only about a year into our journey. So today we're focusing primarily on selling to other security vendors. Their problem is, I need to build a whole bunch of integrations. That's not my core business. What I do with the data that's coming in from those integrations is my secret sauce. So why not just work with a company like Leen that can help me pull in the data from an EDR, for example? It doesn't matter if my customer is using CrowdStrike or SentinelOne. To me, the data will look exactly the same. So I can model that and enable, let's say, a GRC use case or a cyber insurance use case or a SOC automation use case. So that's one segment. That's where we're at right now. The second are the service providers. Many of the more tech-driven ones are already building their own platforms to orchestrate the various tools that their customers are using. So absolutely, we are already talking to some MDRs and some MSSPs that have development resources internally that can utilize an API. And a third segment, of course, are the security teams themselves, where today I think the paradigm is where the more tech-forward security teams could utilize an API in kind of its raw format that we offer today and build applications on top of it. But we do have plans to make that even easier so they can build internal tooling much easier on top of what we've built. Maybe we have component libraries that we can offer to them. We have templates that we can offer to them where they can easily tweak those and just customize the last 10, 20% in code to be very specific to their specific use cases in their enterprise.
It's interesting as you go through those three potential different clients, I could see each one being a very different direction for a startup to go, right? How do you guys, at this stage where you are, determine where to focus and double down?
It's a really good question. I talked a little bit about going through a validation journey when we started. So we actually tried to get a mix of all three types of perspectives as we were going through it. And we just realized that starting with the vendor segment would be honestly the easiest, right? You're trying to find, I would say, the easiest path to victory, to small victories as an early stage startup. And for a few reasons, one, of course, being that these vendors tend to be smaller companies themselves. So there's less bureaucracy, there's less red tape, there's a greater appetite for experimentation because, it's not so far removed from when they were at our stage, right? So they don't mind betting on an early stage startup, which I totally wouldn't expect a Fortune 500 CISO to do in our first year of business, for example. So we didn't want to fight battles that we didn't think we could win. But the way we approach the building of the platform and the technology layer that we're creating is that it's actually common across all of these different segments that we can serve because they all need connectors of some sort. They need a lot of different connectors. They need normalized data, and that's exactly what we're building. There will be other components that we build on top of these connectors in the future to cater to these specific segments, but we'll get there in due time. We're not trying to do too much all at once. We've got good momentum with the vendors, and that's where we're focusing in the very short term, but it won't be too long before we go into the other two segments as well.
I would agree with you. I think that's where you'll see more fruit in the short term versus the long term, right? But one area that I'm curious about is, there's been companies out there doing API integrations, even though that's not, their core business. Like a Splunk is a good example, or Tenable, right? Where these companies have been around a long time. They're used to integrating with a lot of different vendors and products. What have you guys been able to learn from what they've done and how they've kind of standardized just to, be able to kind of, not start from zero, right? Start from where, there's already adoption in that space.
Yeah, so I think these companies, if you talk to them, and we've talked to some C-level execs and VPs of engineering, even at these really large companies, the general sentiment is that if a company like ours existed when they went on their journey to build out all of these connectors, they probably would have utilized us or a similar company. Because if you think about it, in security, the data is very interrelated. So this whole journey of going out and building a bunch of connectors, it never ends, right? Plus these connectors are constantly, the APIs are constantly breaking and changing. So you have to have a dedicated team that stays on top of this task forever, basically. Yeah. But in itself, it's not a huge differentiator. Having integrations, of course, is. If you have more integrations than your competitor, great. But it's what you do with the data that these integrations are providing. That's really your secret sauce. That's your USP in the market, not how you pull the data and how you build your integration. So the more forward-thinking CTOs that we talk to, they realize that this is a commodity that they don't need to deal with if they have an option, right? So that's one perspective that we gained. That taught us that we need to build our connectors in as generic a way as possible that we could serve multiple different use cases. Typically, when a Tenable or a Splunk decides to build a connector, they're obviously doing it with their specific use case, their customers' use cases in mind. For obvious reasons, they don't have to have universal applicability in mind. But we are, of course, taking a very different approach to it. But at the same time, balancing that with giving these companies enough flexibility where something doesn't fit in neatly with our normalized model, it's not like they can't access that data at all. So for example, we offer pass-throughs, right? If you really want a field from CrowdStrike that doesn't fit into our normalized data model, you have the ability to pull it still and use it in your downstream workflows.
So you guys are not only creating the connector, but you're also creating use cases then, is that correct?
We're creating normalized data models. So we're actually use case agnostic. An analogy that I like to use is that we're like Switzerland for security data, right? We want to play nice with everyone. We want to connect to everyone, and we want to be able to be used for any use case. And that's how we build our connectors. So just to give you an example, even though we're a young company, we have close to 20 customers now that span a variety of different sub-segments within security. So we have customers from the GRC space that are building GRC products. We have SOC automation platforms that are utilizing AI and need a lot of connectors to pull that telemetry. We have a cyber insurance firm using us that's leveraging our connectors for the underwriting process. We're talking to some MDRs. We're talking to risk quantification platforms. So there are a lot of different use cases that we can power with the same set of connectors.
Got it. When you say power use cases, where would they write the code for these use cases?
Yeah, so because we're a unified API, we actually operate as a backend service that, I'll give you a tangible example. Drata is one of our customers. If your listeners are familiar with Drata, they do this automated GRC. They allow companies like ours, even bigger ones, to go through a SOC 2 audit workflow or ISO 27000 audit workflow in a very automated fashion, which automation in this case means you're collecting evidence from a lot of different systems that you use as a company, right? They have HR integrations, they have payroll integrations, they have CRM integrations, and they have a bunch of security integrations, which we are powering for them. So literally what Drata is doing is they are allowing their customers to connect to CrowdStrike or Tenable or Wiz or Orca using Leen. We orchestrate pulling that data on behalf of their end customers into Drata's application. And then they're mapping that data to a particular control within a SOC 2 framework, for example. So they have the choice to either call us in real time within their application, or they can run us in a data pipeline where once a day per customer, they fetch data from all of the different systems that they've connected through Leen into the Drata application, and then they provide workflows on top of that.
And are you guys able to reuse any of that you created with Drata, or is that proprietary to their platform?
You can think about it as two parts. There's the ingestion journey of building the connectors and normalizing the data. And then there's what Drata does with the data. In their case, of course, they're mapping that data as a point-in-time evidence, but also as continuous compliance evidence to particular controls within these different frameworks. That second part is very proprietary to Drata. And actually, we don't control that, right? What they do within their application is entirely their business logic. They own that. We work with Cowbell as a cyber insurance company, for example. The way they do their underwriting using the signals that we provide is completely up to them. That's proprietary to them. That first part is all in our control, and that's where we try to make things as generic as possible so we can power all of these different use cases regardless of what our end customer is trying to achieve.
Got it. So you're more the data plumbing.
That's correct.
Got it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you chose this direction, though. I think you definitely picked a good market to start in. And it sounds like, getting this done right with the security market, right? I mean, not just the security vendor landscape, MSPs or MMSPs, as well as, CISOs for small to mid-sized companies and growing, right? Once you start to gain more traction, how are you going to keep this protected, or like, what's the model, right? I think we were talking before about the idea of, do you go full open source? Do you go closed with some aspects of open source ability, right? So you have a community that's contributing and building templates for different types of use cases. Like, what's kind of the plan there?
Yeah, so I think this is a good time to talk a little bit about our vision. I've talked about these three different segments, and we definitely plan to cater to all of them eventually. So the way we think we can approach the MSSPs and the enterprise security teams is by enabling them to build use cases the same way that vendors who are serving today build use cases, right? The difference, of course, is vendors already have their pre-built applications. We're plugging into that. But MSSPs, MDRs, and security teams too are building some type of tooling, right? You can refer to it as internal tooling. So what we plan to do over time is build a component library on top of our connectors and allow these teams to very easily build internal tools that help orchestrate all of the other security tools that they're already buying. The latest stats are that large security teams have anywhere between 50 and 75 security tools in their stack, right? That's a lot. And Ramin talked about this in his past life as well. That's just another anecdotal data point that just proves that there's a need for these internal security tools to exist. And that's what we want to enable for, in the beginning, more tech-forward security teams, but then also partnering with MSSPs to help build internal tooling for maybe the teams that don't have internal engineering resources, for example. And once we get to that stage, I think we can consider open sourcing part of this, right? Where right now it's our team that's building all of the connectors. All of the data models are proprietary to us right now. But in the future, we could open that up. We could allow anyone to build connectors to the connector library. We could also allow anyone to build internal tool templates that are common across the industry. And you've seen this with many other companies, right? I think great examples are companies like Figma and Canva and even Notion, where not only have these companies first seeded templates, but then they've opened it up to the community while still being a closed source platform. So when you go in and decide to start a project, you don't have to start from scratch. You have something to work with, and maybe you only have to tweak 10, 20, 30% of that to get the specific use case that you want out of it. So that's where we plan to go with this in the next few months and maybe a year or so.
It's interesting. It almost sounds like two different business models, right? So one is, obviously the connector piece where, I can only imagine as how you guys think about that as, you need developers, you're constantly creating code, you're maintaining code, you're updating code. And then as companies integrate you become part of their operations, right? Where, you have to maintain essentially a level of service, right? And then the other aspect or, the ambition is to create, those use cases, right? And as I think of those use cases, I think, well, what's the platform that code's going to sit on, right? The Drata example you brought up, that code is on their end, right? Where, that's only applicable to them. But how do you create something more universal outside of that, right? Like a Splunk is a really good example where they've created a lot of custom codes. A lot of vendors have created a lot of custom code on top of Splunk and kind of created like an open source community for some of that, right? Some of it is proprietary and they charge you for it. But, they've gotten the adoption there to, essentially have that be the platform where a lot of those use cases sit on. So I think, in the future, that also, leaves you guys opportunity to figure out how to partner and who to partner with to do that as your platforms. And that would be interesting to see because not only would it be interesting to see how you can create universal use cases for, companies to use, right? Where they don't have to create specific to theirs. But then how do you go across different platforms, right, that provide the same function, right? Like an MDR or EDR or a SIM, right? A lot of these, the challenge is they don't communicate, the use cases between these different platforms, where if that was your ambition, it's how do you solve that between these different vendors?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think the way we do that is twofold. One, of course, is through our normalized data models. So regardless of where the data is coming from, we try to fit it into a common data schema. We are more and more gravitating towards OCSF as a standard. We're actually part of their Slack community and we're giving back to that community and contributing. There are a few of these different open standards. I think OCSF is the one that probably has the most traction around it. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. If the industry gravitates towards this platform and this standard, then we're happy to support that as well. So that's one way where we can, so to speak, make sure that all of these different vendors in the same stack are speaking the same language, and it's easy to build use cases on top of that. And I think to your point earlier about building two different businesses, I think right now it might seem like that, but the way we look at it is you get to interact with our platform in different ways depending on what your level of technical expertise is. If you're like a team like Drata, right, where they obviously have really good software engineers, they can interact purely with our API. But if you're a security engineering team where you're not a core software developer, you have really good security knowledge, you're able to do some scripting, then you interact with the more GUI-based aspect of our platform that we build at some point, right? Where we give you a component library, we give you templates. We, of course, have the connectors and the normalized data models underpinning all of that, but then you can build specific use cases. And I think it might be worth talking about what some of those use cases could be as well. We were talking about this a little bit before we started the podcast, where there are some very common ones that require a lot of integrations, but are very powerful. I've talked to a lot of security engineering teams and they refer to this as Slack ops, right? Where can I use Slack to automate a lot of different security workflows for me? For example, I had this person in my organization that's logged in from a location we've never seen before. Can I send them a Slack message real quick and ask if that's really them, right? And if they respond yes, then great. There's nothing to be done there. If they don't respond, send me a message to let me know. And, maybe I need to create an incident around this. Maybe I need to pull in data from our threat intel feeds and from our EDR to figure out, and maybe our identity platform to figure out if any alerts have fired off there. And then I need to assign this ticket to the right person that's on call. So right there, you can see, right, you have probably 5 or 6 different integrations, including with things like Slack and PagerDuty and CrowdStrike and so on. Sounds very simple. It's very powerful if you build it, but it requires development resources to do this. There's actually a lot of tech debt involved in that as well, where when these teams rebuild these use cases internally at every organization, not only is it a waste of resources, but it's also now tech debt that your security team has inherited, versus having a platform where you can just have all of that live and you can deploy it within your infrastructure and easily tweak it And big part of the maintenance is on a company like ours, where we keep those connectors up to date for you.
So I have a question on the business side of the house, Kabir. How are you going to market? How are you starting these conversations?
So today we're a scrappy startup. So it's avenues like this. Honestly, we get a fair amount of inbound because I think what we're doing in the industry is somewhat unique. So
yeah,
when folks hear about us, it definitely piques their interest and they reach out to learn more. Even if it doesn't end up being a customer that we acquired, they might know someone in their network that's facing the problems that we're trying to solve. So that's definitely been a really powerful mechanism for us. When we raised our pre-seed round of funding last year, we made sure to only take money from folks in security. And of course, that's opened up a lot of doors for us. There's people on our cap table that have excellent networks, so they're able to introduce us to potential prospects. We also just do some cold outreach. We're part of Slack communities where there's other founders and security people. So we use all of those kind of methods to reach out to folks and find the right people to talk to.
No, that's great. We've felt the same challenge scaling a company. And so, it's always fun to talk to other founders. Again, we're not a product company. We're more of a service company, but still the challenges still exist. Where do you go first? You start with your own network. How do you gain additional network? How do you get, access to the right referrals and the right introductions? That's always part of the big challenge of scaling a company like this. And how have you been able to build a strong team from a development perspective? Like recruiting, how have you been focusing that? It sounds like you've scaled companies in the past. So did you have like a network of folks that you knew you could kind of pull into this business starting off, or, what was that like?
A little bit. The disadvantage of not being from security is that I didn't have a network of folks that understood security particularly well, but Neil did. So definitely we've leaned on his network. We've pulled in a couple of folks that he's worked with in the past. We did use one recruiting firm to help us hire. So we've used a mix of different strategies. Plus, we intentionally put out a lot of content on LinkedIn and other sources. Our first hire ever was inbound. He found us when we had almost nothing. I actually have to sit down with him and figure out exactly how he found us. And we ended up hiring him after running him through the whole process. So yeah, just like acquiring customers, we think about onboarding folks to the company from an employee standpoint in a very similar way. We'll use every tool in our toolkit to find the best talent.
Yeah. It's maintaining that scrappy personality and drive to, hey, look, we'll figure this out. It could come in a variety of different ways. And I think that's the exciting part of scaling a company, right? And it's maintaining the vision. It's finding folks that identify with your vision. And then it's, solving a real problem. And then seeing your clients come to you with like real exciting solutions they've been able to develop through your tool. And then now you have additional testimonials, you have stories, and it's all about storytelling, right? Which is what you're doing today. And so, yeah, this has been great. What do you see in the future now that you're getting more exposed to the problems in the security community, especially on the vendors landscape, right? And we all talk about this, like, what's the future going to look like? Is it we're going to start seeing more consolidation? Are we going to continue to see innovative smaller firms build ideas and then bigger firms, eat them up and, buy them out? For you, kind of almost building a new category in the security space of what your product offers. What do you see as kind of some of the future that your company will be able to kind of be a part of, and anything from that perspective? Hopefully my question's clear enough.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about platformization in security, and I think it's valid for some of the very core use cases, some of the sort of foundational technologies that exist within the space. But I think the nature of security is such that you're not going to go from teams that have 70 tools today to teams that have 5 tools in the next 5 years, right? I just don't think it's realistic, because even the really large companies like the Palo Altos of the world don't cover every use case. And now you have AI coming into the mix. So you're going to have a whole host of companies that need to secure AI models. So, CrowdStrike and SentinelOne and Palo Alto don't cover those use cases. So I think there's still, from the conversations we're having, still very much an attitude from a lot of security practitioners that they want to buy best of breed. And sure, some of those use cases can be rolled up into a single platform, but maybe 5 out of your 70 tools can be rolled up. For all of the others, you still need to buy point solutions. And from our perspective, you need internal tooling of some sort to orchestrate all of those point solutions. So you're not managing these different tools and trying to make them speak the right language using scrappy scripts and Google Docs and just hacky things like that. This is already happening. So we want to formalize that process and make it much easier for these teams to orchestrate these different tools and just make their lives a little bit easier.
I think that's a good use case to solve, but I think about adoption there, right? The challenge I think you're going to have is the teams that are going to have the investment essentially to do that are going to be the bigger ones, right? The bigger companies with the bigger budgets, and then the smaller ones, right? And even the medium-sized ones, those are where I think your focus with the vendors are going to be more fruitful, where they're not going to have a line item on their budget for something like this, but if it comes as part of a vendor, already that they're working with, and it's like an add-on functionality, I could see that being a lot more, applicable and easy to digest for them, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why we're taking this multi-pronged approach, because if you're a 5-person security team, you're probably focused on the basics, right? You're not trying to build internal tooling. It doesn't make sense unless you're in a very highly regulated industry. And we've talked to a few of those folks, like in fintech or small banks and healthcare. Even if you're a small security team, your security posture is actually much higher than your average SaaS startup, for example. But yeah, those are few and far between. You're absolutely right. The larger companies are the ones that are more sophisticated that could utilize something like this. And those are some of the conversations we're having at the moment.
Yeah. And I think those could be fruitful too, right? Because they have resources, right? They're going to have resources to do the development. They're going to have resources to, partner with you guys to figure things out, because they're going to have, those use cases are going to be painful for them. They're trying to solve those. For the small companies, right? I've seen where they want one platform. Like a lot of the clients that I work with more recently, we push, a single platform towards them. They don't have that many resources. So having an EDR, a SIM, email, right? All these things in one place is easier for them to manage versus, multiple vendors, right? Then they're not going to have the investment to, integrate all those, right? Where, if you guys focus on the vendor side there and help the vendors kind of clean that space up as well, I think there'll be a lot more benefit. You can almost watch where, acquisitions are happening, right? When, a company acquires another company in the security space, hey, would you like our help to help figure out how to communicate these two different platforms together? That can also be, a good use case for you guys to target, especially if you get like a Palo Alto or someone, right? Then you can kind of follow along for all their future acquisitions as well.
That's right. Yeah, that's a really good use case. And one we haven't had a chance to tap into yet, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So how can people get more information on Leen to learn more about your business and your solution?
So you can find us at leen.dev. All of our documentation is out in the open. It's docs.leen.dev. So have a look. We make it really easy for folks to understand our solution and get started. We stand up sandboxes for every one of the connectors we support. So if you just reach out to us, we'll give you access right away, let you poke around, play with the API, and just see what you think you can build. We're also very active on LinkedIn. I am personally. So if any of what I've shared is interesting, I love having conversations to understand what people want to build, what we might be able to enable for them. So please feel free to reach out.
That's great. We'll make sure we put the link to your website on the comment section for our YouTube and for Spotify. It's leen.dev, just in case you were thinking lean meat. But hey, Kabir, really great having you on our show, and exciting to hear what you are building and how you're going to make a big difference in this community. We're rooting for you, and we really appreciate your time today. Thanks for sharing your story.
The pleasure was mine. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Take care. Have a great day.